I now call the Snoqualmie City Council meeting to order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Mayhew, can you please lead us?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, can we please have the roll call?
Councilmember James.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Munden.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
Councilmember Pruitt.
Here.
Mayor Larson.
I am here. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for tonight?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion or questions?
Mr. Mayor, could we please move the minutes for, I'm sorry, I'm looking,
November 13th.
November 13th off the consent agenda? And then we also need to pull Agenda Bill 17176,
Okay.
and that's at staff request.
Yeah,
The minutes, just so you know, we do have a citizen that spoke that is questioning that the minutes are wrong, and Bob Sturbank will explain. Correct?
Oh, well, I was just asked what the opportunities were to address that. Minutes are approved and adopted each meeting by the council, so that the minutes are the council's. So having taken them from the consent agenda, a council member may, if they wish, move to adopt and then move to amend the minutes, or if council prefers, someone wants to resort to the tape, the minutes could be tabled until the next meeting, and council could refer it to the mayor and staff to check the minutes against the tape, and then to bring back any corrections that better track. Those are the two options that I see.
So the minutes were actually taken by Tia, who I understand will not be back until after the beginning of the year. Does it have to be the person that took the minutes to validate the tape?
No.
Then I would suggest that we table the minutes until the next council meeting so the tape can be verified.
yeah, I would recommend the same. Yeah, we'll just do it to the satisfaction of the citizen that commented.
So to restate, I would like to move to table the minutes from the November 13th meeting till the next meeting, and to pull Agenda Bill 17176 from the agenda.
So second.
There's motion and a second as stated by Councilmember Pruitt. Further discussion? Councilmember James?
Further discussion, I think Tia is going to be back on the 12th. Does that, she'll be back in time for the,
It won't matter. Jody, the rest of the staff or Jody can take care of modifying that, making sure
good,
it's
thank you.
updated. Yeah. All right, thank you. Any further discussion on this particular motion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, are there any other items for discussion? I guess I would just ask this time if there's any items for the committee to hold that any council members want to add to the agenda. Just want to know if there's any items for the committee of the whole that any council members want to add on the agenda at this time.
Mayor, if I could, I would like to just put it on the agenda just to, I'd ask council members, as well as council members elect, about any ideas or items they'd like to see considered for their retreat. And that deadline was today, so I wouldn't mind another opportunity just to poll council tonight.
And put that on committee of the whole?
Yes,
All right.
just as perhaps a reminder, and then we could give them through the end of the week, perhaps to submit anything else they may have. But I want to make sure it gets on the committee of the whole so we're addressing it appropriately.
All right, and then Bob, I'm going to ask if it's okay with the council under committee of the whole to also, there was an assertion made by a citizen, a couple citizens a couple weeks ago that a petition was represented in a PSRC grant regarding the Fisher Creek Light, that somehow the staff had been misusing that petition, and so wanted to provide an opportunity for response. We could do that on the committee of the whole as well.
Okay. Mayor?
That's okay.
I just have a question about the approval of warrants, which is on the consent agenda. And I'm hoping that the finance director might make some comment on additional work that's been done to make sure that we're not double paying anything. Is that something that could happen? Do we need to pull that off the consent agenda in order for that to happen, or could that be addressed somewhere else?
I think that could be handled as a quick comment when we get to the consent agenda. Councilman Ray, thank you. All right. Any other items for the agenda for tonight or changes? All right, with that, so I'll ask for council to move and second the addition of the discussion of retreat topics and the Fisher Creek PSRC grant issue on our committee of the whole.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, so back to the main motion of approving the agenda. All in favor of the agenda?
Aye.
And opposed? That's with all the amendments, of course. All right, with that, we then move on to citizens' comments. At this time, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on an item that is not on the agenda tonight? Richard, we're going to get you under presentations next. So, you have another item? Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Richard Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Railway Museum, and I just wanted to use my 3 minutes to thank you for supporting the Northwest Railway Museum this year. This has been a particularly eventful year for us. We completed our Railway Education Center, which was a $2.6 million project. It was a pretty big swallow for us, but we did get it done and opened. We also acquired an electric interurban car that used to run between Seattle and Tacoma. It's going to be, look forward to the opportunity to tell you more about that in the future. And we successfully served almost 138,000 people this year. We're particularly grateful for your lodging tax fund and your Parks Department support this year. And I hope to soon return to give a more detailed presentation about what the museum's done in the last few years and what we're planning to do in the next coming years. And I presented a little letter to the clerk there that has a few photos and captions of some of the highlights of this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'll add a quick note to the interurban car that they picked up. One part of the historical significance for Snoqualmie, if you might recall, is when Charles Baker flipped on the power plant at the falls over 100 years ago. That was one of the first utilities or areas that used that power, was to light up that interurban line going between Tacoma and Seattle. So, Monica.
Hello, I'd like to address the council tonight.
Monica,
Wow.
if you could state your full name and address.
Monica Lowney, P.O. Box 493, Snoqualmie.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to set my little timer here. Anyway, as we know, wow, it's been an excellent election, a very long one. We know that votes will be certified tomorrow. And because I was at the elections office today reviewing some things on their system, I felt compelled to speak and share some information with citizens. Interesting. So we have 7,723 registered voters in Snoqualmie. 3,865 voted. Out of that number, 3,800 counted, 65 did not because 30 voted late and 35 had no signature verification or did not sign their envelopes. So to those council members who were reelected, I want to congratulate you. As many know, Sean and I have had the toughest race, the closest race. I've been actually chasing ballots in the past couple weeks, and I have the final numbers. Out of the 3,801 people that voted for us, 1,751 voted for Sean, and 1,709 voted for me. So we're 42 votes apart. So I want to congratulate you, Sean, on your election. Very well done. At the same time, I just want to remind council members, we had a lot of close races, and I hope that it was recognized that a lot of citizens do have concerns in our community, and I hope that that will be taken more seriously in the future with our council. I would definitely like to state that I'm definitely not going anywhere. Many people know me from the Fisher Avenue, Snoqualmie, intersection traffic signal, which is how I got started in becoming a community advocate a few years ago, and that will continue. Also, the mill site and the environmental issues. There will be some environmental organizations reviewing that, and we're looking forward to the EIS coming out soon. Tax increases, which I know the city is considering raising our property taxes very soon. A lot of citizens are concerned about that. And of course, fiscal responsibility, future development, and of course, the ethics investigation regarding Dan Marcinko are just a few things people would like to see followed through on. But I have one more minute, so I'm going to make it very quick. I pulled this off Google. Since we have a strong mayor form of government, what's expected from our council is this. Please ask tough questions. Get the facts before voting. Have no conflicts of interest. Confirm that residents are properly informed and notified of projects and budgets before voting. Understand resident sentiment. Focus on reducing spending instead of raising taxes and fees. Carefully vet city contracts and budgets, including employment contracts. Ensure that city staff obtain sealed bids prior to approving development or maintenance projects. And vote according to what is best for the city, not necessarily for a mayor's pet project or agenda. Do outside research, find out what works or doesn't in other cities. Work with the mayor, but also be the check and balance where needed, and propose that you work with other county and state agencies where necessary. So again, congratulations to all of you. I'm looking forward to the coming year, watching you closely. I can't believe it's only 17 more months before individuals can throw their hat in the race again if they'd like to. And a lot of that will be determined on how you all vote. So good luck. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yeah. Anna.
Hi, Anna Sotelo, 7713 Center Boulevard Southeast. Last night, as I was driving through downtown, it's beautiful. I think it's one of the best years ever as far as lights and the beauty. But I was so disappointed when I got up to the ridge, and I just kind of was left feeling like the redheaded stepchild. We're using the same LED lights. We haven't changed. Some of them are actually mismatched. And I guess I wasn't aware when we decided, or when you decided, or when it was decided that the poles would be decorated downtown. I'm assuming it's something new, and I don't have a problem with that. And it's not tit for tat and who for who, but I think if you were to really compare the two parts, being the ridge and downtown, it's very dramatically different. This year, the ice skating rink is not going to go to the ridge. Okay, I can really respect and appreciate why and the cost of moving it, but I also want to add that that is a business bringer for us. And say what you say about it, it did. And if it brings in an extra couple $100 for me, and I know we used to do it during the week as well and not just on weekends, that was good on a Monday or Tuesday night. So I always appreciated it, to be honest with you, every year. That, in addition with not having that and looking like we're the secondhand Christmas lights, I guess I'm just kind of questioning, and I, again, like I said, it just kind of is insult to injury to injury to injury to injury. In addition to that, kind of to piggyback, I'm still really, I would like all of you to please encourage the mayor and Bob to continue our conversations that we started last summer to be repairing the damaged relationships between the Ridge merchants and the city. It's kind of been left in their court. In addition, as well, I'm still waiting for all the addresses so that I can make my own merchant meeting if I have to. The downtown merchants and I have been trying to get together for 2 weeks, but we don't have anyone's email address contacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon. Is there any other citizen that would like to speak at this time? All right, seeing no one else move forward, we will move on to public hearings, presentations, proclamations, and appointments. At this time, the public hearing regarding the 2017 to 2018 biennium budget amendment ordinance is now open. There's supposed to be a sign-up sheet over there. If I could have a staff member, Mark, perhaps you could grab that real quick, or Joan, thank you. Are there any signatures there? Okay, is there anybody would like, there's no signatures? All right, is there anybody would like to speak to this item that has not had a chance to speak? All right, seeing no one come forward to speak, public hearing is now closed. At this time, council, I'd like to appoint Carol Peterson to the Human Services Advisory Committee. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to appoint Carol Peterson as stated. Is there any discussion?
Only in that I think she'll do a fabulous job.
Well, I did get a note from Carol. She's very appreciative of the opportunity you're offering her. Unfortunately, she had an opportunity to go to Las Vegas with her daughter. And that's why she's not here, and I don't blame her in the least.
But she's accepting the appointment,
She's
correct?
accepting the
Okay.
appointment.
She did want to be
She
here.
doesn't know anything about this,
She-
actually.
She's coming back, right?
She is coming back from Las Vegas, to the best of our knowledge, yes.
Okay. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this appointment prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. With that, it's my pleasure at this time to move on to a Distinguished Service Award for Officer Chris Mosetter with this Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm going to ask the chief to come forward and please say a few words about Chris before we give him the award. And please, chief, tell me if I mispronounced his last name.
I was correct, sir. Feel like I've been up too long already tonight. But this is nice when you get to recognize somebody, especially from a different agency, and it just shows how well we work with other agencies. And just the short time I've been here, I never had to really work with a Department of Fish and Wildlife or any type of organization like that from where I came from. So it was a learning experience, and it's been nice. He's been to like everything we do, including like the last Coffee with a Cop. He shows up, a National Night Out, to Energy's Bicycle Rodeo and so forth. So I would like to call Captain Almquist to come up, and he had expressed a desire to talk a little bit about Chris.
Good evening. For the last 5 years of being here at Snoqualmie, I've been extremely impressed with Chris Mosetter. Everything that we do, I mean, obviously we live in a rural environment, which creates its own special things that happen up on the ridge and down below, and a lot of that has to do with animals and wildlife, and Chris has just been extremely responsive. I remember the first couple months I was here, we had a problem with a bear, and his team of officers had captured this humongous bear, and that was not foreign to me. However, it was just, that's how my relationship of meeting Chris was, oh, he's right there, was just seeing how they work and how they operate so well. Chris, being here for so many years, has built this relationship with the officers themselves, being able to contact him on a cell phone. We've even put our two-way radios that are in our cars so that we can communicate with Chris when we have incidents that are going down, so that we don't have to have this relay of dispatches and relaying information because we don't have his frequency. So we've been able to connect those dots with Chris, and he's been extremely responsive. Being a resident of North Bend, he's had his own challenges, and we've all, officers from here have been able to come and around his family and help him out in times of need, and he would do the same thing for us. So we get, even though Chris is like the only person here in our area to speak of as like maybe the resident officer, he comes with just a great wealth of knowledge and just an inspiration to help us out in any way that we can. So he's just extremely appreciative. And I know that Corporal Draveling wants to speak a little bit about him as well, having a close relationship with him.
Thank you. Good evening. Just a little bit more information about Chris. I have the pleasure to know him both professionally, and our families know each other. And his way of doing business and his professionalism and his good, kind heart and always being there and always helping out is both, he has that with both his professional side and his family side and friend side. And from all of us Snoqualmie police officers, we just want to give him a thank you. I've been working with him for 10 years that he's been up here. And back when there was only one of us on sometimes in the morning, and Chris has always been there to come and help out and give me that extra backup. And now with the other officers here, everybody has something positive to say whenever they interact with Chris, and he comes up and helps out, and he's always there to lend a hand. And he's the same way in his personal life too. So I just really want to thank him from the whole Snoqualmie Police Department, and obviously both cities, North Bend and Snoqualmie, because he assists us in both cities all the time. So if we give him a round of applause.
Nigel here is the mayor on behalf of the citizens of the city of Snoqualmie, on behalf of the council, on behalf of the city staff, and particularly the police department, to present you with this Distinguished Service Award in honor and recognition of continued assistance to the city of Snoqualmie for wildlife education, participation, assistance in special events such as the National Night Out and the Tanner Jeans Bicycle Safety Rodeo. Present this to you, Officer Chris Mosetter, Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, on this 27th day of November, 2017. Congratulations. Thank you.
I was telling Nigel I should talk about a story. Bears. I'm not used to bears, but obviously they're all around here. So one morning I come to work and there was a call, bear walking down the street. I'm thinking, a bear walking down the street. So what do we do? I don't know what we do. So later on that day, that morning, one of our officers, Nigel, that was just up here, he talks about what happened is he basically chased the bear, yelling and screaming, ah! And the bear turned around and ran. I said, that's a unique way of treating. I don't know what I would have done, but I never thought about chasing a bear and screaming and that being work. But, so I'm wondering if you learned that from our friend Chris.
Well, I saw Chris sneakily snuck up on like a bear on Nick there.
Kind of looks like a bear.
So the fun's not over, folks. We're also going to have a chance at this time to
Yeah, I
recognize Sergeants Paul Graham and Paul Keaton, who were recipients of the Trilogy Award for having successfully completed the FBI's Trilogy Supervisory Leadership Institute, the Command Leadership Institute, and the Executive Leadership Institute, and completed that program. And so again, Chief Phipps, if you could.
This is, when I started here, there was, some people that I knew I'd have to rely on to be able to fit in, if you will, and learn this department. And the two gentlemen standing beside me are those two guys, really. We have many of them standing at the back of the room as well. But these two, they know this city, they know this department, they know the people here. And, the fact that I soon learned that they were attending the FBI LEADA program kind of told me a lot about them. Because normally what you'll see is, if they've been doing this, and by the way, congratulations on 27-year anniversary for the city of Snoqualmie. Usually when they've done 27 years, they're not really interested in learning anymore and kind of just doing what they do. They're kind of set in their ways. But one thing that I like to think is that we're a continuous learning environment. We got to learn every day. And what they did was they attended this, and that's what they're doing. They're continuing to learn and evolve and change. And that's what I wanted to bring to this organization, and I didn't even really need to bring it. They were doing it. And so that's, these two are going to be our examples, if you will, to set that culture and set that culture to where everybody will want to continually learn. And what they did was the FBI LEADA program is, it says FBI, and that's somewhat misleading, although it did start out with the FBI. Like in the early 80s, the FBI felt there was a need to start having more training nationwide for departments, and they weren't able to really do that. So they were led by some now retired FBI agents, and they developed what is now the #1 law enforcement training organization in the nation. And it's a 3-week, you go to a supervisory, command staff, and an executive training course, 1 week each, and you learn what's going on today, of implicit bias. They're learning about the issues with implicit bias and how to deal with that. They're learning about 21st century policing. And that's exactly what I'm looking at. And so these two are my example of a shoulder to kind of lean on, but also the future, if you will. You've been here 27 years. How long have you been here, Paul? 28 years. It's pretty amazing that both of them still have a desire to improve and be better and show the young guys really how it's done. So thank you very much.
All right. And then it's my pleasure to present a proclamation for the Northwest Railway Museum today, for the Giving Tuesday coming up. Whereas Giving Tuesday was established as a national day of giving on the Tuesday following Thanksgiving, and whereas Giving Tuesday is a celebration of philanthropy and volunteerism, where people give whatever they are able to give, and whereas Giving Tuesday is a day where citizens work together to share commitments, rally for favorite causes, build a stronger community, and think about other people. And whereas Giving Tuesday is an opportunity to encourage citizens to serve others throughout this holiday season and during other times of the year. Now, therefore, I, Mayor of the City of Snoqualmie, do hereby proclaim November 28, 2017 as Giving Tuesday in the City of Snoqualmie and encourage all citizens to join together to give back to the community any way that is personally meaningful. Given this day of November 27, 2017. Richard, did you want to come and receive this, or were you going to speak to that at all, or?
Encourage people to give to their favorite charity.
Yeah, one of which is the Northwest Rail Museum. So. I was kind of counting on you to describe what exactly Giving Tuesday is to folks, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, it's.
Or you could toss it to Peggy if you want.
No, I'll let him.
Well, Giving Tuesday is becoming more of a global phenomenon as well. It's the idea of having a day where we focus on giving back to our communities, whether it's volunteering or donating services or hopefully donating money. Charities always need money. And it can also be volunteering and donating goods as well. So we as a museum are successful in Snoqualmie because of the generosity of our community. And the same goes for our area churches, our Encompass in North Bend, our Snoqualmie Valley History Museum in North Bend, and many other groups that I know are throughout all our communities here in the Upper Valley.
Great. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Mary, for bringing
appreciate you coming
attention to
tonight.
it.
Yeah. Jody instructed me that you were going to receive this tonight, so you're going to take it whether you like it or not. There you go. There you go.
Good.
All right, thank you, Richard. All right, with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All items listed below will be enacted by one motion. Action items include minutes for the November 13, 2017.
No.
I'm sorry. Well, I didn't get to that yet. Oh, minutes for the
No minutes.
No minutes.
Oh, no minutes at all. Okay, I thought there was a special one in there. My apologies. Approval of warrants as stated in the agenda packet. Other approvals include Agenda Bill 17163, set a public hearing on the 2017 annual progress report for the City of Snoqualmie floodplain management repetitive loss plan for December 11, 2017 at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter. Agenda Bill 17167, Resolution 1422, determining the lowest responsive bidder, awarding a small works public works contract to the authorizing execution of a small works contract with Well West Construction for the Community Park Trail. And Agenda Bill 17165, Washington State Department of Ecology Agreement Number WQSWCAP 1719 Snoqualmie 00132 Water Quality Stormwater Capacity 179 Agreement. Do I have a motion, Council?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as stated. Is there any questions or discussion? And Rob, or whoever you designate, if you could answer Councilmember Mayhew's question real quickly, that would be great. On the warrants.
So you're asking what systems we have in place to avoid processing a duplicate warrant, duplicate check, right?
Or, well, I was focused on the idea that since we know that one slipped through, something in our systems didn't prevent that. And so I was wondering what additional thing you might have done since then with regard to warrants.
Well, the diagnosis of the problem was interesting, to say the least. The financial information system has 3 features in it that should kick out a notify us of a duplicate, or actually produces an alert. It's the invoice date, the invoice amount, and what's the third one?
Invoice number?
The
Invoice
number. So unfortunately, all three of those have to be wrong in order for this thing to produce an alert. And with this particular invoice, they were not all wrong. A couple of them were right, and one was wrong. So I've been talking to IT to see if we can arrange a fix for that. In the meantime, departments, particularly Public Works, have been taking invoices, looking backwards at paid invoices over the past, sometimes 12 months, comparing the current invoice number and amount, and then certifying to us that it's not a duplicate.
Fantastic. And just to clarify, as I understand it, this is not a warrant for a single payment in this amount. It's a conglomeration of a number of items.
It is. The one that you asked about, $622,000, is 83 different warrants.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, Councilmember Sunwell.
Did you see that?
Well done.
That might not ever happen again. So a question on the, and I'm not on the committee, so pardon me if this is a question that's been answered before. One of the things in this consent agenda is referring to what I believe is going to become a paved sidewalk from Curtis to Ridge. Is that correct? I'm super familiar with that path. I actually love the fact that it's not paved. I'm just curious as to what was the instigation for taking something that's a soft trail surface and making it into a hard trail or a hard pavement surface.
Okay.
Was there a public outcry or?
Go ahead.
Dan, you want to come and speak?
So what we had was a lot of drainage from the driveway, if you will, where the tennis courts are, all the way down to Ridge Street. And that was causing quite a bit of problems. So when the guys looked at it, they looked at putting asphalt in versus concrete, and there was a cost difference, I believe, about $6,000, Jeff? About $6,000 difference. And
Between what and what?
asphalt versus concrete.
Okay.
And then when you have, the life, though, of concrete is much longer, 2 to 3 times.
So my question isn't about whether it's concrete or asphalt. My question is bark versus anything else.
Right.
Why
And
does it need an upgrade at all?
the bark was, whenever it rains, there was quite a few problems with drainage, and not only was the bark going into what is referred to as the amphitheater, but it was causing quite a few problems. Everything, it was just, we tried putting some drainage in, didn't work. So now we're going to make it a hard surface, which will allow us to make a better maintenance sidewalk for it.
I mean, is it muddy to where people weren't using it?
Yeah, they
during the
can't
winter
use
months,
it, they go up
Personally,
onto the
pushing
school
a stroller
property.
through there for me is extremely painful if you try to go down there. So
During the winter months. when
during
it's
the
not-
winter, even if you get a few days of rain in the summer.
And I'm sorry, Councilmember,
Sorry,
wondered if
I
you
was
could.
recognized,
Yeah,
sorry.
be recognized, yeah, thank you.
I was referring to the walkers, but she's right. But the walkers and the people on bikes had to go up onto the school property. So working with them, we made a decision. We had a 1% King County funding, so we're using those funds on an annual basis, and we're using it to put in concrete.
Dan, clarify 1%, because it sounds like you just said only 1% of the project's paid with that. You're talking about a trails fund that they use.
Yeah,
Or
thank
rather,
you. It's 1% we get from King County each year, so it's 100% funded by that fund.
What's the 1% though, Dan? 1% of what?
King County, the trails levy that we get through King County.
King County has a trails levy. of which
Countywide
we
trails
get-
levy.
We get 1% of that
So-
total.
So this $138,000 is coming 100% from that money?
Correct.
So
It's restricted revenue that can only be used for
I
trails.
guess I'm confused as to why a trails levy would take a trail and turn it into a paved sidewalk.
If,
Better use.
Mayor, if I could speak to that.
well, I'm thinking at this point, I thought that we might need to pull this item off the consent agenda so we can move on. This is turning into a more elaborate conversation. Did you want to pull this off the consent agenda?
Well, I'm not sure I want to vote for it.
Well, then let's pull it off the consent agenda so we
Okay.
can have a continue a discussion.
So I'd make a motion to pull it off the consent agenda.
Second,
All right.
if you need.
All right, any other discussions on the consent agenda? All right, so we have a motion and a second to pull Agenda Bill 17167 off the consent agenda. And with that item off, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. With that, we'll move on to ordinances, Parks and Public Works Committee, Agenda Bill 17169.
Point of order, Mayor?
Yeah.
Don't we have to vote on the consent agenda? that
Oh, I thought I did
remains?
do a vote. sorry.
There was a motion and second to remove that, so there was a vote on that, so now you have the
Right.
underlying motion.
So back to the original motion. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? All right. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on any of these items prior to action? Any of the remaining items? All right, seeing no one move forward, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. With that, we move on to Parks and Public Works Committee under ordinances. Agenda Bill 17169, ordinance amending Title 12, Title 13, Title 15, and 16, and 17, and 19 of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code so as to be consistent with the Western Washington Phase 2 National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. This was introduced on the 27th and will be ready for action on December 11th. So,
Introduced tonight.
yeah, so well, I think it was already read in on the 27th, the summary statement, was it not? Oh, I'm sorry.
Today
Tonight
is
the
the
27th. Continue, Councilmember Holloway.
All right. The city must adopt code revisions to be consistent with its National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, NPDES Phase 2 permit, regulated by by Washington State Department of Ecology. The NPDES Phase 2 municipal stormwater permit requires a comprehensive review of city codes and enforceable documents to integrate low-impact development, LID, features and improvements into the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. Revisions must be adopted by December 31, 2017. And you all have copies of the ordinance revisions to review.
Again, this is not expected for action until the 11th council, but however, are there any questions or comments at this time?
So we have a red line version. Sorry.
Councilmember Pruitt.
Thank you. We have a red line version in our agenda packet, and then I was handed a new ordinance packet. Are there any differences?
There are a handful of small differences. So what you have in the agenda packet was the collection of red lines to the various chapters in Titles 12 through 19. Due to timing on when we received those from the consultant, we were not able, and the press of other items that have been in front of this council, we were not able to give you a full-blown ordinance that incorporated all of those red lines in one document. When we were at committee, we discussed that with the chair and committed to bring that document to you tonight. That's what you've got. We did not, in the end, incorporate all of the red line changes into a single document because some of the titles that are amended, for example, Title 17 changes alone are 204 pages. So if we had, and then there are several other chapters that are another 30 to 50 pages each. So where we had single or standalone or groups of sections, those are incorporated here. They're the same red line changes that are in the packet. Where they were large, such as Title 17, they are adopted by reference to an exhibit, Exhibit A, B, C, D, and E, and so on. There are a collection of changes to the substance, and I'll summarize those, and Nicole can jump in as well. There were, given the breadth of this, there were a handful of, I think, what staff viewed as housekeeping changes that were included in the original red line draft that did not relate to stormwater. And in Washington, we have just at the local level, just as we do at the state level, there's a single subject rule, and an ordinance needs to deal with a single subject. It can be broad, such as changes to stormwater-related changes, but it has to deal with a single subject. A couple of those changes fell outside that. For example, housekeeping changes to the Parks chapter of the code to reflect that the director is the director of Parks and Public Works instead of the Parks director. Those are out. I think there was an additional adoption of a new section in the Department of Ecology SEPA model rules for an optional DNS process. That's something that we may well want the council to consider, but it didn't technically relate to stormwater, so it's not included in that, in what you see. And then last but not least, there are two changes to the purpose section of Chapter 1518, which is the stormwater program itself that provides for adoption of the manual. And we had some corrections there to refer to the establishment of a combined utility, which the city council did a number of years ago, rather than a standalone stormwater utility. The consultants weren't aware that we operate a combined water, sewer, and stormwater utility. So there was a correction related to that, and another correction related to the fact that those who are charged stormwater fees don't include only the property owners who receive specific services. They also include property owners who generate significant stormwater. The law allows us to do that. That's been the city's practice. We wanted to make sure that the purpose statement accurately reflected that. So with those handful of small changes, what you see here is a more consolidated version of the red lines that are in the packet with an operative document that actually provides for the council's adoption. Nicole, do you want to jump in, add?
I actually think you
Okay.
just covered it all, so, yeah.
And again, this is for first reading, so not, adoption would be proposed for the council meeting on the December 11th.
Okay, any other questions or comments, council?
Then
All
the
right.
only concern you might
I'm sorry,
show,
Councilmember Holloway, did you want to be, thank you, go ahead.
the only concern from past experience with this, the only one concern you may want to look at as you read through this is it does expand the definition of the zone and what is called a significant tree a little bit. We have had issues, it's fine where trees grow, but when they encroach on the sidewalk, you have to make a choice between tree and sidewalk, and this kind of pushes it a little further into the favor of the tree. So we need to look at that a little bit. It can get quite expensive to start moving sidewalks around for growing trees. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to possible future action? All right, seeing no one move forward, we'll move on to Finance Administration Committee, Agenda Bill 17158, ordinance levying the general taxes and levying excess property taxes for the city of Snoqualmie for the fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2018 on all property, both real and personal, in said city, which is subject to taxation. The general taxes for the purpose of paying sufficient revenue to carry on the departments of said city for the ensuing year. And the excess property tax levy is for the purpose of paying debt service on the city's unlimited tax general obligation bonds, 2016, all is required by law and providing for collection thereof. This was introduced on the 13th and will be considered for action tonight. The summary statement was already read in, so if you could just please read the motion, Councilmember Jeans.
Move to adopt ordinance number
1196.
1197.
1196.
1196, levying the general taxes and levying excess property taxes for the city of Snoqualmie for the fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2018, on all property, both real and personal, in said city which is subject to taxation. The general taxes are for the purpose of paying sufficient revenues to carry on the department of said city, the departments of said city for the ensuing year, and the excess property tax levy is for the purpose of paying the debt service on the city's unlimited tax general obligation bonds 2016, all as required by law, and providing for the collection thereof. Second, please.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 1196 as stated by Councilmember Jeans. Any discussion, council? Councilmember Holloway.
So, within recent history, we ourselves have done a levy increase for public safety. There was a levy increase on our citizens from the school for the new needed high school. There is potential levy action from the state in regards to education. This is our major revenue source for the general fund, but all of our revenue sources are up this year. Thank heaven that we're out of the recession we were in prior. Relatively correct, Bob?
Yes,
I'm sorry,
generally speaking.
Point of order, if you could direct your questions.
Okay,
to the
sorry.
Sheriff, please.
He had one of my looks, and I had to. In general, I asked for consideration of banking the 1% this year. It's $75,000, which will not grossly impact our budget, and while these other things wash out, we can come back and collect at least a portion of that. Some of it may evaporate through the wonders of math in state government, but we have the opportunity to bank and give our citizens a little relief. That's my comments.
Councilmember Pruitt.
Could you have somebody from staff explain what banking means?
Rob. Yeah.
There's a lot of.
This
new-
is sophisticated, so hang on to it. We simply do not levy the 1% this year. It is automatically banked by the assessor.
So we could.
You have to
in
take it
essence,
out of that
Next year, we
ordinance.
could do 2% or thereabouts.
1.01% for this year, next year. So you get a tiny bit of compounding.
So we could do 2.01. by
I'm sorry,
next-
Councilmember's point of order. Councilmember's point of order, if you could be recognized by the chair prior to speaking, please. Councilmember Holloway.
Question of clarification. So if we were to bank this year and were to implement our full levy possibility next year, it would be 2% or 2.1%?
I believe it's 2.01%. You get a little compounding for the first year that you deferred.
Okay.
All right, Councilmember Sunwell, you had a question?
No.
All right. Councilmember Pruitt.
The reason why I was asking is because the public is listening to this, and that's kind of it's an interesting idea to do, so I wanted to have it explained. My understanding, though, is that potentially you could lose out of part of that 75,000. Is that not a statement that was made 2 weeks ago by somebody on the administration?
I'll turn that question to Bob Burson.
Rob, you need to address through the microphone. Thanks.
I think what was mentioned was that you lose the buying power if inflation rises during that period.
And you can lose the compounding growth of those monies.
You know, I regret to say that I'm not sure of that. It's easy enough to find out.
Well, I mean, if you increase it by 75,000 this year, for example, next year you would do 1% on the base plus that 75,000, so you lose a compounding increase over the years.
Actually,
Or you're suggesting you can adjust even in the banking for that?
Well, again, I'm not fully equipped to address this, but my understanding has been that the first you defer, it does compound 0.1%, 1/10 of 1%, so 1.01.
Even in the
You get your
banking
levy
capacity, okay.
plus 1/10 on top of it. But that's easy enough to figure out.
Okay. I want to, before I come back to some of the council members who spoke, give a chance for Councilmember Jeans or Ross
Mayor.
or Munden.
Mayor,
to-
if I could interrupt, Councilmember Pruitt had asked about a statement I had made, and I want to make sure I clarify that.
Go ahead, Bob.
I had heard, and I don't know the full details, we can certainly get that information. I think it's Rob suggesting that North Bend has been banking its 1% every year for the past numerous years, and I understand that they were not able to take the fully banked amounts. They were considering doing that for next year, and I don't have the details. I just overheard that when I was watching one of their clips as I was trying to figure out what they were referring to. So it wasn't clear when you look at the tape even, but I can certainly find out from staff, or I can have our finance staff find that out if council would like. But that's the statement I'd made. I was understanding they had not able to take the full amount.
Councilmember Ross.
So a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about increasing at 1%, which is about $75,000, you mentioned, I think the administration mentioned several different reasons why we needed to increase it. So can you go over what the $75,000 would partially cover?
One of the major issues is that we have inflationary increases that are averaging 2 to 3% a year. You've got obviously the major part of our general fund and is paying for salaries and benefits for employees. I don't know the exact amount, but I know it's well in excess of 60%. And so we have to keep up with those issues. We have labor contracts. Those are the primary three, if you will, for our staff. So it's police, fire, and then Teamsters, which covers all other employees who are not covered by those labor contracts. We have agreements in place for those. That was one of the primary issues.
Tonight, you even discussed the possibility of adding an IT person or support staff for those contracts. That was $110,000 alone, would chew up more than that increase. Councilmember Sunwell, if you could hang on while I just check in with the other three that haven't spoken yet. Councilmember Jeans, no, you're good? Mundon or Mayhew? Okay, Councilmember Sunwell, please.
Can someone identify, and I'm just going to pull a number out of the air, for the average $500,000 home in Snoqualmie, what $75,000 overall increase would mean to their budget? I wanted to say, it seemed like it was like $13 or something like that.
2.5 cents per thousand, about $13, yeah, about a $500,000.
So it's about $13 for a $500,000 evaluation of $500,000?
Right,
So that's $1 a month?
buck a month.
Okay.
Councilmember Pruitt?
So I have a question and then I have a comment. My question is, we have this for action tonight. I believe that we have to take action on this by the end of December, not November. Is that wrong? We have to do it tonight, so.
By the first Monday in December, and you don't meet then, so
Okay.
you never have met, so we usually do it the last meeting in November.
Okay, so I have concern that we are talking about banking without having all the full details. And I would remind council, or remind the public actually, that even if we did not take the 1% increase, your personal property tax bill may go up because it's based on your assessed valuation. And if your assessed valuation went up more, you could end up with a larger tax bill.
And just, Mayor?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Just to clarify, we just discussed that at F&A partly last week, the Finance Administration Council Committee. The city's portion of the total tax bill is roughly, I believe, 20%?
It's 18%. We just
18%.
clarified that again today.
So when we're discussing property taxes, we have to keep in mind that the city's portion is 18%. And we had talked about the idea, or at least the reality, that the school district and the state's property tax for schools is definitely going to increase the vast majority of all homeowners or all properties. The city's portion, again, depending on the assessed value and or when the county assessor comes in and does the reassessments, may or may not increase depending on individual homeowners' experiences. And that's very difficult to gauge. We can't say with certainty that it's going to go up a certain percent. We use the words on average, dependent on the value of the property at the current time. So we mentioned the $500,000 valuation. We could do that same calculation for any other valuation.
Okay, Rob, before I turn to you, I wanted to just clarify real quick. PJ, I know you and I were talking today. I think you'd recently got the most recent updated data from the King County Assessor's Office, which was showing that, I think probably because of the school bond increases and whatnot, the city now represents, out of every property tax dollar, only 18 cents of that goes to the city. So that school slice of the pie is actually considerably larger now, and as proportionally, 53%. Yeah, and has proportionally kind of squeezed the city's proportional share down a bit further. So we'll need to update that. Rob, did you want to add something?
Well, yeah, I was going to mention that one of the other discussions that we had last time about this was a question of how do we cover the rest of the increased expenses in the general fund if we were to defer this. And I guess the main point is that selfishly, the property tax is an incredibly stable fund and one that we can rely on, particularly as 50% of the general fund goes to public safety. So it's always been of a selfish interest to try and keep it as whole as possible. The other revenues in the city, from business taxation, sales tax, utility taxes, are somewhat dependent on the economy and also decisions that you make. We have to admit that one of our biggest increases this year has been the utility taxes because of the increase in the rate level, mainly related to the CIP. So I guess for a conservative, in fact, my contemporary's number one job in all of the cities is to keep predators away from the general fund and preserve it because there's so little opportunity for it to increase. And particularly because the assessed valuation is now disattached from taxes. Because the assessed valuation goes up does not mean your tax bill is going up. So I wanted to say that. I also thought that Drew put a little interesting model together that I'll just quickly summarize. He can show it to you if you want to go into it. But if the $500,000 at our current rate, that's, the city is 287 there, the levy rate is actually 288. There's a reason for that, but I won't trouble you with it. But if the breaking point is 7.8%, if a person's assessed valuation goes up about 7.8%, or in the case of the $500,000 home, from $500,000 to $540,000, the tax in 18 and 17 is exactly the same, $1,390. If we were to take the 1% off, the levy rate goes down 2.5 cents, and we lose 16 bucks. But it's, you know, it's nonetheless an important chunk of money. Anyway, those are my arguments.
I think it may be well worth taking a couple minutes. I've seen this model before. It's pretty cool. If you want to throw a couple of samples up there, Drew.
So basically, all we're doing is trying to model what's going to happen in 2018 if we were to take the 1% and also try to incorporate, say, what the value of your home is, and then compare that against the change in assessed valuation overall for the city. So basically, we can submit this to council for them to explore on their own time. But in this situation right here, I guess what we really want to look at is the change in city taxes based on a $500,000 home with an assessed valuation change at 13.13%. Now that is coming directly from the King County Assessor's Office. And then if we wanted to increase our levy rate, or sorry, our levy amount by 1%, and that's going to get us the $75,000 that you see right here. We already know what we're going to get in terms of new construction. We are estimating an increase in utility value. We also know what we're going to get in terms of refunds for 2018. So that amount right there is fixed. The cells that we can change are the ones that you see in red for the most part. And in 2017, a $500,000 home assessed at a rate of $2.78 per $1,000 assessed valuation would pay $1,390. Now, for 2018, if your home value increased 7.81% from $500,000 to $539,000, and with the overall assessed valuation changing overall for the total city from $2.72 billion to $3.08 billion, you would actually see the same tax.
Well, you would see the
dollar
millage rate would subsequently go down in relation to the higher valuation cost.
Yes, yes, it would. So the millage rate, or the property tax levy rate that you see here, actually decreased from 2.78 to 2.58, or $2.78 to $2.58
Per thousand.
per $1,000 assessed valuation, giving us the same tax amount on that same property. Now, if we were to
Because the increase of the specific house was lower than the overall average increase of the region or.
the break even
That assumes this house increases
Well,
more
I
than
know,
any
but
other
this is
house.
this is for illustrative purposes, only Councilmember Holloway, yeah.
the break-even point is 7.81%. You can see here.
So if the house
Home
on the,
value actually increased, say, 9%,
well, do it at 15 or 20%.
so 20%, for example, you actually see that this same home would pay $1,547, or an increase of $157 from 2017. If the assessed valuation, for example, only increased 5% on your home, your actual total dollar amount that you would pay decreased by $36.
So let's assume my house went up exactly the same as the rest of the city or the region at 13.13%. So I can see what the actual 1% increase
So-
results in.
If your increase, if your home value increased 13.13%, the total increase in your property tax amount is $69
This is for the city's portion again.
for the city's portion for the entire year.
Yeah, more than the buck a month.
Yes.
Drew, just because these numbers changed on the other screen, these are the regular levy rates.
Yep.
The other ones we screen paying about 10 cents extra for the voted levy.
Excess levy.
Do we have a
Which is-
microphone we can get Rob to get him, make sure we get him on the record?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that on the previous slide, we showed the city's tax rate at $2.87. This, and 268 over here.
58.
Well, 68. So these figures do not include the excess levy for the 2002 voted bonds. So it adds about 10 or 11 cents to the rate.
That's the base levy, okay. I don't want to belabor this too much, just making sure people understand how the levy works. It doesn't get us away from the fact that there's a structural deficit in the limitations on 1%, in that costs are increasing 2 to 3% per year, and we can only increase half that revenue source by a percent per year at most.
There's a mathematical formula that underlies this model, and that's how you can determine how much exactly you're going to pay. And all we had to do was set up this model so that you council members could see that change depending on those variables that we have.
To clarification, but depending on the assumptions.
Councilmember
you
Holloway,
make-
do you want to speak?
Yes. Depending on the assumptions you make, the only firm assertion you can make is that this levy increase will increase the taxes of the city by $75,000.
Correct. Individual results may vary.
Right, that's all.
Well said.
Yeah, it just depends on whether your home valuation goes up north of average or south of average.
Right.
So, all right. Going back to the main topic again, then on the ordinance, any further discussions or questions on that or comments? Councilmember Mayhew?
Okay.
No, Councilmember Mayhew.
Yes. So I'm always troubled by this notion that we can separate the revenue from the expenditure. So what I haven't heard as part of this discussion is any discussion that says we're going to cut back on our spending by $75,000. And so this is about 50% of our revenue stream. So, and it's already limited to 1%. And as I just heard the city administrator say, our costs are going up, at least 60% of our costs are going up 2 to 3% a year.
Minimum of 60%, yes.
And then I suspect if you analyzed the contracts that the city has and saw through them to see how many of those are actually contracts for services that are probably expecting that kind of increase, and I don't know what our renewal periods are, but I suspect that the vast majority of our costs are going up, say, 3% a year. And so I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to take half our revenue stream and send it to zero without a thorough discussion of how are we going to cut those costs, because I don't hear us talking about excess spending that we have that we've identified that we can cut, or excess positions that we're going to cut, or raises we're not going to give to our employees, or any other method of covering that. So I think 1% is already very troubling. It means that if our costs are going up 3%, and again, this is just math, if half our revenue's only 1%, I still want to know where we're getting the other 5% to make so the other 50% of the revenue has to go up at least 5% to get 3% in total. So without a discussion of how we're going to cover that, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that we wouldn't at least take the 1%. And I suspect that it's clear that at 1% we're already putting a heck of a squeeze. Now, I did listen carefully to Councilmember Holloway's point that there are other revenue sources that are up this year. And so while I see that there could be analysis of that, I also know that some of those revenue sources are what we call one-time revenue streams. And so I've heard Councilmember Pruitt talk about the idea that maybe some of those one-time revenues actually recur at some level every year, but I don't see an analysis of that. So I'm very uncomfortable not taking this 1% unless we can clarify what we're going to do about spending in response to that, or we can clarify where we're going to make up the revenue, and it has to be on a sustainable basis in my view. So for those reasons, it seems to me that this 1% seems something that we need to do.
Councilmember Sunwell.
I don't know if you were intending to say this, but as you were talking, I came up with this idea, which actually might be yours. If we were to vote yes and take the $75,000, would we also be willing to match that, so to speak, with cutting $75,000 out of our budget? Therefore, I believe, I'm a terrible mathematician, but I believe that gets us to 2 of the 3% that we're talking about. And relying 1 less percentage point on some of our bounteous things that have been upticks since the recession. I'm just wondering if we're going to ask voters to cinch up their belts by $13, $69, $100 a year, are we willing to match that? It's not really a question for you, Drew, unless you have an answer.
Well, I can speak to historically if we wanted to get into a few additional slides for the most part of how we've attempted to handle this structural deficit that we see, if that's of interest to council.
Yeah, I guess I would refer the council back to the kickoff of the entire budget discussion with the overall general fund projections over the next several years and where those lines, the expense and revenue lines, were going. And we saw as we were coming to the full build out of Snoqualmie Ridge, particularly in the next year or so, it becomes particularly challenging as we're weaning ourselves off the last of any one-time revenues that are the budget's depending on. And a lot of those additional revenues that Councilmember Holloway talked about, we've used a little bit of a trick where we take that to pay for the demands on, with that revenue and with that growth in the city has come increasing demand on city services. And we've been putting a lot of that money toward increasing staffing rather than addressing the underlying structural gap that exists if the overall costs are going up at 3% per year and you're only getting 1% on 60% of the budget increase, then you got a structural gap that continues to erode at the foundation of your outlook and scenario, which is why a decade ago, we were seeing that even a decade ago, particularly 2001 when the IMA initiative, the 1% cap was approved, that threw cities across Washington State into a crisis. And part of our strategy has been these issues on economic growth that are coming to fruition after so many years of work to make sure that we're diversifying those revenue sources and putting ourselves in a fiscally sustainable position. But it's still our strong recommendation that this 1% is just one more small measure to get us toward fiscal sustainability. I think Councilmember Mayhew stated it quite eloquently. Drew, did you want to add something more to that, or?
I
don't know
think
if you're
that,
going to refer back to some of those original slides or projections.
so I had some slides prepared from earlier this year, for example, that we can get into that compares the trajectory of our property tax increase against general fund expenditures over time, controlling for inflation, and also indexed to 2007.
All right, we'll queue them up. We can take I think until we see them, we don't know if they.
So, Chair. So I do have two
Councilmember Holloway.
I do have two questions and comment. I appreciate your point of view, but
Councilmember Holloway, if you could speak into the microphone.
I appreciate your point of view, but I come at it slightly different in a government point of view, that we should justify the increase, not justify not doing it. We should have to justify doing it. My question, though, is can you tell me ending fund balance in 2018 for the general fund and the revenue increases for the other sources of revenue? Does the revenue increases in the other sources of revenue total to more than 75,000 or less than 75,000?
Well, oops. There you're on. Should be on now.
That includes new batteries for a microphone.
Hey, Rob.
It's not on the website yet.
I'm sorry to pick on you. Sorry to pick on you.
By the way, fix my computer.
I don't think you have.
Okay. So the general fund balance at the end of 2018 is about $642,000.
With the amended budget.
With the amended budget, right. So your second question was the
Increase for the other revenue sources.
okay. Well, I can't quote you, but I'll get you. We're gonna see a substantial increase in utility taxes. The other thing I need to mention about the more than $75,000 as I guess what the mayor's been saying for years and years about new construction. In fact, the council has, that we get the full levy value for any new construction on the books for the first time. So that we know to be $140,000 for 2018. We also get the increased utility value. If the value of the electric, gas, telephone, cable systems go up, the city gets the full levy rate for the difference, the old value, new value. And that we're estimating at another $130,000. So it's pretty much a fact that you haven't checked the numbers lately, but when I left here, we had about 2 years left on the ridge, if that, where most of the new construction is coming from. So that's going to have a diminishing effect on available property taxes. I just don't think they can go on forever. There are some boosts, certainly. I think we're getting a pretty good shot of taxes off the school construction. And of course, the hydroelectric facility rebuild was another, but those are not going to be repeated very often. So it keeps pointing to the fact that the general fund stability is something that we like. And it may not be next year in 2018, but eventually you all know our new construction revenue is going to go down fairly significantly.
Yeah, Rob, maybe a simpler way to put the question was that we've been looking at long-range fiscal projections for over a decade, and as recently as a year ago, we were looking at still having a projected gap as those one-time revenues dissipate and start to quickly disappear in the next year and a half, 2 years. With the build out of Snoqualmie Ridge, the question is this a fiscally sustainable budget, or is it how much of that $14-15 million budget is still relying on one-time revenues from all that growth? And our conclusion a year and a half ago or so was about $1 million. And, obviously some strategies to get off of that. I know that's improved lately. Drew, you did a recent reanalysis of that. How much would you say is still one-time revenues? Or do you not? If you could get a microphone, please.
Well, at this moment, I would probably say that one-time revenues are probably 1% to 2% of general fund revenues. We are removing the entirety of construction sales tax out of the sales tax total amount, and we're also looking into B&O tax as well. So we've actually become more conservative with our policies in terms of removing that one-time sales tax and one-time B&O tax since the last time Rob was here. So.
I was just going to add, for benefit of the audience, if they don't know what we're talking about, the sales tax on new homes and new construction and some of these big major projects around here we refer to as one-time.
Appliances, furnaces, all the things that go into a new home.
We have physically been removing the sales tax cash flow from operations, so we're not tempted to balance operating budgets with one-time revenues. So that's what he's talking about.
Can I get clarification, though?
Our Councilmember Holloway, before you speak again, I want to just do a quick round robin, see if there's anyone else that wanted to comment before we come back around to Councilmember Holloway again. All right, go ahead.
So point of clarification. So we just did a utility rate increase upwards of 15%, somewhere north of that. And the utility tax increase, utility tax is already on that. Was the revenue increase in utility tax more or less than $75,000? I believe you said it was more.
I think it's more.
It's more.
Okay, so we already have a revenue source which has made that $75,000. Okay, so I agree with your point earlier. It's not only expenditures, but it's revenues we need to look at to picture to justify what we do. I'm telling you, the revenue picture, $75,000 is there. Only one source, utility tax.
And
Councilmember Sunwell.
Utility taxes do not need to be used for utilities, correct?
Correct.
Or general fund revenue.
Okay. Councilmember Mayhew.
So, maybe you could help me out. If we're looking at 3% of the budget, that would be how much?
3% of 15 million.
150,000.
3.5.
450.
450,000, I'm sorry. Yeah.
450,000. So,
Right, there's nothing magic about the $75,000.
but there is something magical about 450.
No, I know, you're going where I was thinking of going. Go ahead, I know you're going.
So, then if I'm correctly following Councilmember Holloway's thinking, did the other general fund revenues that aren't property taxes go up by $450,000?
I just can't quote you right now. I should be able to. I don't know if we can. We know the utility taxes went up more than $75,000. The business and occupation tax is only about $650,000 a year, so I don't think it went up 75. And the sales taxes is the third largest one. And I just can't recall off the top of my head what the projected increase is, but it's easy to get.
Drew, do you have any estimates yourself?
No, I don't have any estimates off the top of my head. We did present this information at the first budget workshop where we had a budget status and forecast presentation, and I can't quite recall. I know that we are doing quite well in terms of construction sales tax. I think we were relatively stable with sustainable sales tax as well as sustainable B&O tax. I can't quite speak to if that is an actual increase above what we had budgeted in late 2016 for the 17-18 budget.
Suffice it to say, though, that you guys are familiar enough with this budget to know that it's not been, to Councilmember Mayhew's question, those cost increases of a real number, because there's sort of a fixation on $75,000 tonight.
Yeah.
Or we're struggling to have those revenue increases keep up with that, $300,000 to $450,000 increase every year.
That's correct.
In expenditures, in salaries and wages and benefits and just inflation on materials and so forth, versus a 1% increase on half of the revenue source or a property tax that's bringing in at most $75,000 due to an artificial cap. So I guess I just wanted you to speak to that, because I don't think you're necessarily talking about the specific number. You're just trying to get in general. What are those?
And my follow-up question was going to be, and whatever that number is that's coming from other than property taxes, my next question was going to be, and how much of that is one-time revenue?
Yeah.
And so what I'm concerned about is we're going to get to a number that is well below 450,000. And my understanding from the previous presentation, which my understanding was that even with the 75,000, we are digging into one-time revenues to balance next year's budget.
Yeah, because you said we're doing good on construction revenues, which is one time.
Right. We are removing those one-time revenues to
Drew,
fund.
it seems like you're doing some of that analysis that we're talking about right here.
We're not balancing the budget with one-time revenues. What we are saying, though, is that we have not separated all of the one-time revenues that we think are occurring out there. For instance, the construction sector, which has been in retail sales tax as high as 60% of the whole retail sales tax base. We're taking what we know it can identify as out of it, but there's always going to be background construction, remodeling going on. I think we're always going to have something out of it. So we've kind of concentrated on taking the Ridge cash out, the large projects like the rebuild of the hydroelectric system, and sticking that in a reserve where it takes 10 people to touch it.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I want to get back to the question about the revenues we have for next year. We've got the new construction. So on the property tax side, I believe I saw a number of $283,000 in new. It's the new construction valuation that'll come on the books for next year. So that'll be revenue that will have its additional or new revenues. That'll be recurring. So that's sustainable. That's a property tax. If you want to include the utility tax on our own utilities that are in the general fund, that's considered to be sustainable because that doesn't ever go down unless you were to have people obviously not occupying homes, which is not the case here. But the other two that are not sustainable and that are volatile are the retail sales and the business and occupation. And I don't know what proportion that makes up of the total revenue, but I know that property taxes and utility taxes make up more than 50%. We know that because property tax alone makes up 50%. So the council needs to obviously weigh that option of saying if you're comfortable looking at the possibility of, because we've had years where retail sales have declined, even in what I'll call a year coming out of the recession, and we can go back and show you those numbers, and the same with B&O tax. So those aren't necessarily revenues that would you expect to continue to increase, even though we've had population increases and/or other factors included. So that's the other piece. But just to go back to Councilor Mayhew's question, if you just looked at, for instance, the employee-related general fund expenditures alone, that's a little bit north of $8 million per year. And if you took just 1% of that, the cost is at a clip of about $80,000 for each 1%. And I mentioned the factor of anywhere between 2 and 3, and a little bit north of that for next year, because we already have a settled contract, for instance, in police, which is higher than 3%. So we expect that we're thinking we're going to come in hopefully averaging around 3% total cost increase for those employees. And they represent about, I believe, 80% of our total number of employees, maybe a little bit higher than that. So you can see that number alone is going to be in excess of roughly $250,000 for the employees in the police, fire, and general fund that are the Teamsters, and then you got the management professional as well. But I would suggest that you want to be very careful about how you weigh in, or at least how you want to take on the issue of retail sales and B&O, because those are the variables that you're dealing with here. And that's what we've tried to explain over the years, is that you got to remember, we're only provided the opportunity, the council is, to make a decision about taking up to 1%. And we've had at least, in the past 4 years, I think we've had 2 requests from the voters for a levy lid lift to supplement that general fund revenue. The most recent one, obviously, was in 2016. Those are paid for specific positions, but we also knew that we needed to sustain, we didn't have the money in the budget, if you will, to hire those specialty positions, 1 in fire, 2 in police, and then prior to that, obviously, there was 1 in parks, and I believe also another 1 in police 4 years prior to that.
Yeah, so even with the 2 asked levy lid lifts over the 16 years since the 1% cap went into place, we've still had to make at least 2 adjustments over all those years because of that erosive effect, that gap between revenues not rising as fast as expenses. So, and Councilmember Holloway, as you know, there's even, aside from general operations, there's unfunded liabilities we've been struggling mightily with, such as the sidewalks downtown around the ridge, where the trees are maturing and pushing up sidewalks all over, and those that have to come out of general fund, and they're competing with dollars going to police and fire and everywhere else. And those dollars needed are far exceed. I mean, it was at least a $2-3 million problem downtown just rebuilding sidewalks.
Agreed.
As one
I
example.
don't think we're going to fix all the sidewalks in 1 year.
No, I'm just saying as one
example. 75,000. That's an ongoing operational. We have to mix that in with all the other budget conversations.
Mayor, if I could also mention, we can go back if council would like. I think that again, there's only 3 of you that were here prior to 2016, but 2017, but we've had those discussions about specialty positions, and we've avoided those to the point where we got almost too lean. And that's what the mayor mentioned earlier in the budget discussions. We're going to potentially, when we do this internal review, there might be recommendations that may include specialty positions to facilitate or at least supplement the current staff in some key areas. And our current staff would even tell you that the mayor's budget has been very, very lean over the years. We've obviously had to increase because of the demands on services. But as an example, we grew into our roughly our current equivalent of police officers and firefighters until more recently. Up until 2016, we had to grow into those authorized staffing levels. That was a better part of 10 years. So we haven't seen any particular changes there, but we had to grow a few other special positions just to keep up with demand for services. And I don't think we're out of the woods yet, frankly, on that issue.
May I add, Mayor, just we certainly haven't ignored cost cutting either. In 2015, we combined Parks and Public Works. We eliminated a $150,000 a year director position. We've combined building and community development, and while they...
Or building and planning, yeah.
What?
Building and planning into community development,
All right.
yeah.
Well, you changed that on me, huh?
Welcome
So
back.
planning doesn't generate any money. I'm sorry, Nicole. But the efficiencies we gain there have promised to reduce the draw on the general fund. So these guys have done some things that have saved some money. Not that we couldn't do more, but we've done some of it anyway, was my point.
Go ahead, Drew.
So basically, just to support that discussion around financial prudence in this city, this is probably going to get a bit complex, so we don't necessarily need to get into this chart if we want to. What I've done up here is I've compared the cost of government amongst some different categories in the general fund, including services, salaries and wages, employee benefits, and the overall total general fund expenditures against our total property tax collection since 2007. Every number you see here has been indexed to 2007. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take the property tax line there, which is red right now, you'll see that by 2016, it looks like it is right now at 105% when matching that up with the y-axis. That means essentially that the property tax that we collected in 2016 is 105% of the property tax we collected in 2007, based on a per capita rate. So this is per person. We have to make sure, understand that the population has been growing over time, and therefore we've needed to increase staff commensurately. So what I'm showing here is basically, if you take a look at both the blue line as well as the orange line, and remember the orange line is general fund salaries and wages, on a per capita basis, the city of Snoqualmie is spending roughly 85% of the amount that we spent back in 2007. And that just signifies exactly what we've done as a city. We've been cutting costs by saving on labor and trying to become more efficient on a per-person basis that we have here in this city.
And I assume achieving some economies of scale as well.
Yes. And I would also just signify, or at least speak to, the two categories that are more than what we've collected in property tax since 2007 that you see on this chart are services and employee benefits. I would allege that it's difficult for us to control employee benefits. We are a part of a large pool under AWC along with other municipal employees, and so because it's such a large pool, we should be getting the best rates out there for the most part. And even with those best rates that we're receiving, it's actually greater than the property tax that we've collected on a per capita basis. In addition to that, what you see in terms of general fund services is really related to professional services. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but what we tend to do is come to you, council members, through a bid process. We actually survey a bunch of different service consultants out there in terms of the provision to us for services, and we're trying to get the best price possible when we do so. Even when we're attempting to set up the conditions for competition in this city, what you find is that over time, expenditures for general fund services have actually grown at a greater percentage than our property tax collection. And so that is what this is showing, is essentially for things that we can't necessarily control, yes, they are expanding at a greater rate than property taxes. However, we've had to compensate for that by, say, delaying labor in the city, for the city of Snoqualmie. And in terms of, say, if you were to approve the 1% increase, we could then potentially focus on those salaries and wages and maybe additionally hire some more people in addition to the utility tax increase and so on. So keep that in mind. I know this is complicated. I'd probably recommend taking this home or at some point. But that's essentially what I wanted to describe, is that we as a city have been financially prudent with the 1% property tax over time and have found ways to save money here in the city. And usually it comes through salaries and wages for employees or delaying labor until it's absolutely necessary.
Councilmember Snow.
So Drew, I'm curious, the red line is property tax collected, right?
Yes.
I'm curious why that's on a per capita basis when that's not how it's collected. Why would you use that basis to analyze property taxes?
Well, you want to control for population growth over time. So given the increase in the population here, they demand more services. And as
I
a
understand they
result of those
demand more
services, you
services,
have
but it
to-
doesn't demand more revenue.
Well, do you not need to keep up with the service demand in the city to keep the level consistent? I mean, we have 40 parks, for example, right now. If we kept the employment levels same for the Parks Department or the Parks Operations Department back in 2017, we would not have enough people to service all those parks that we have currently in the city.
Mayor?
I want to kick it to Bob real quick.
This chart is trying to show a comparison, and so you need a base, and that's why we're using the basis per capita. So they're all if you want to, this way you can compare these 5 factors. We clearly don't obviously collect on a per capita basis, anything, with maybe the exception of retail sales. I'm not going to go into that detail, but anyway, this is just trying to show the base of 2007. Everything's at 100%, and then you control out for the 11 or 9 years shown on the chart. That's all it's trying to show.
And yeah, if we build more neighborhoods, that's more streets to patrol, that's more streets to have firefighters checking out, more parks to maintain, more sidewalks to maintain, more urban forest to maintain. So there's definitely cost and a need for more revenue to address those criteria.
Mayor, I suppose we could show this. You could do the same graph and show it on a per unit household unit. I suppose. I mean, there's really no difference
Just needs some
there.
sort of common analysis factor.
Right.
Councilmember Holloway.
So I'm sorry, guys, we've been one of the fastest growing cities, and as a result of that, your per capita charts kind of get out of whack. What I can gather from this is the staff, the city has done a great job in overall maintaining the general fund on a per capita basis, and it can tell the percentage changes in the different categories of expenditures. But until you show me a chart that shows me general fund year by year, dollar value, I'm not sure what it adds to the conversation, guys.
But you've been looking at those numbers for years, Councilmember
I know.
Holloway.
I'm just saying, I'm talking to this chart. I don't know what this chart does for me, except for those 2 things. I'm not sure it adds to the present conversation.
Mayor?
Councilmember Jeans, were you trying to?
I want to take a global view of this. Back when Iman made a very emotional and successful bid for controlling what we can collect in taxes, there was a time when there was probably a widespread belief that the cities had unfettered opportunities to raise taxes to meet the budgets of what they wanted to do for the citizens. And so it was very appealing to taxpayers to say, well, this must be right. So when he says 1%, that was real easy for all of us taxpayers. And back then, I was just a taxpayer. It was wonderful for us to say, well, we're going to control taxes, control spending in government. And after spending some time in government and in going through budget processes for all of these years, I have built up sort of a confidence in the staff and in the council in our consideration of the budgets. And so if I have confidence in our budget process, that we're meeting the needs of our citizens who are very demanding, they want this city to be the best, and to be the best, we have to provide services that maybe other cities don't do. I mean, we have more parks. I mean, the way we treat people with police, we do things differently, and especially in response to our perception of what the people want. And throughout all of that, there is the realization that certainly 1% property taxes is not going to come close to paying for the cost of just the normal inflation, just the cost of if you've got to replace a widget this year compared to next year and the year after that, it's going to cost 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% more. In addition to union negotiated wages where they increase at certain amounts each year that exceeds 1%, we just can't sustain government. And so I'm sort of with Councilmember Mayhew that it's I mean, I hate to say it, I have to go home to my wife and explain this. It just seems like a no-brainer, 1%. So, I mean, I'm in favor of it because all of these wonderful, intricate analyses and reasons for us to control spending and not spend more than we need to do. If you have some faith in the budget process and what we go through in the biennial budget and the mid-budget, the mid-term review, I have faith that we're doing the right thing there. I have faith that we're giving the citizens what they want. And I think 1% helps pay for that. Doesn't pay for all of it, but helps pay for that. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I think it's worth noting or adding to that, that when the I-747 initiative was passed, which actually was shot down by the courts and the legislature upheld it, or the 1%, Iman himself even argued when the opponents strongly said that this is not sustainable, 1% per year. And Iman's response was, I'm not saying you can't raise property taxes, I'm just saying at a minimum you can do 1%, but you just have to go to the voters. If you want to increase it beyond that, you let the people decide. And that's precisely what it's forced us to do, is to tighten our fiscal ship as much as possible before we, like I said, it's not been a pleasant thing to want to do. We've only done it twice in the last 16 years or since the Iman initiative. Going out, making that case. We have consistently survey after survey when asking the question, because there's three ways you can resolve a problem. You can increase taxes, you can increase revenues, such as with economic development, or you can cut costs. We've generally been using all three of those, but when we consistently ask the residents, do you want to drop in the levels of service, or do you want to keep the service levels high? It's been consistently coming back from the vast majority of voters that, no, we want our service levels high in this community, which is why we've been reluctant to cut back on the quality or level of those services. Any other comments or questions, council? Or have we exhausted this one? All right, with that, I'll ask, is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Anna.
Hi, Anna Sotelo, 7713 Center Boulevard. This is really not my thing, but it kind of sucked me in a little bit. One, I'm paying a landlord for their house, so I'll be paying their increase. But more than that, I pay triple net on probably a $30 million building, so it will affect me more. But to bounce off of what Councilmember Jean said, he trusts the system and he trusts that. As a citizen right now and as a merchant, I don't, because over the last month, I have heard that B&O taxes are not being collected. I'm being told that certain controls are not being done in order for invoices going out twice. I don't know if we've overpaid things. I don't really trust the system. And looking at the fact that I know the school bonds don't affect, that's two different things, but we had a school bond, then we had the utility rate increase, and now levy, and the average citizen does not know how to distinguish what these different raises are. So they just see it going up and up and up and up, but they don't understand, and now we're gonna have another school levy, so that's coming as well. I think at this point, the city's biggest thing is PR. And what Sean's talking about with the transparency, and to be able to say that. If $75,000 doesn't equal $450, then we really, and apparently there is gonna be some kind of issue to go over the controls, but can we do that first? Because I feel like, and as well, like the city engineer, he hasn't worked here since February. What happened to his salary? Does that go back into the general funds? Things that I don't know that, but I'm just wondering, if we really look at the controls and we really look at things and tightening things up, and is this, why do we have maybe these two departments together, and maybe those two departments don't come together? And again, where I'm confused when I was questioning someone's salary, it was when those two departments got combined and there was this extra money that they didn't want to lose out of parks by giving it back to general funds. Again, those are the things, I'm not saying right or wrong because it's not my job to, but those are the things that I get confused by and create doubt. So I don't have the same trust that Councilmember Jeans has about all these things being right. I would rather see things get fixed internally and then know exactly what kind of money you need. Because I can tell you one thing, my revenue hasn't gone up in years. It's actually going down. I hope that the Safeway store will bring in the revenue that you guys are hoping to get, and that is the goal. But again, I don't see how you're going to make $1 out of 50 cents.
Yeah. No, Monica, if you just use the one at the podium, please.
I really don't like leaning
Monica, if you
forward.
could just please use the one at the podium, please put that back on the table.
Mic at the podium.
Please put it back at the table and use the one at the podium.
What's the problem, Matt? Really?
I just ask you to just kind of respect the protocol.
I'm
that
addressing the council now. Thank
Just
you.
respect the protocol that everyone else does,
Okay,
please.
okay, thank you. Oh, is this somebody's laptop? Or- oh, thank you. Okay, Monica Loney, PO Box 493. Wow, so once again, as I mentioned in my earlier statement, has the city accounted for the additional sales tax and Safeway Bartels? That's a different issue, but focusing on reducing our spending instead of raising taxes and fees is what I think our council needs to consider. I don't think our city ever will. When I went to Citizens Academy in 2013, this was a huge issue. How are we going to pay our bills when the ridge is built out? Well, we all know the ridge is now built out. Why weren't we cutting costs and making plans years ago? I don't know. But what I can say is last year for Proposition 1, which was our safety levy tax, I questioned the employee benefits because I feel like employee benefits going up 2 to 3% a year, totally fine for police and fire. They put their lives on their line. Give them whatever they need. That's negotiated through unions. But city staffers that work in this building, and Matt and I went back and forth with this during one of our little informational meetings that barely anyone attended. We had 23 staffers at that time that pay zero toward their health care benefits. And, you know, if that's the status quo, maybe that's the status quo. But I did some number crunching during that meeting, and if the average city staffer who is not a union employee put in an average of, say, $500 a month toward their health care benefits and dental and life insurance and whatever perks they get, say they have, you know, maybe some have 3 kids, maybe one is a single person. On average, $500 a month. After taxes, that'd only be $300 to that employee. And if you multiply that by 12, that's on average of $5,100 a year per employee, which is fair. The average citizen pays a lot more than that, I could assure you. I know I do. And if you multiply that by 23 employees, that's $117,300 a month. Gosh, that would pay for Lizzie's salary. That would actually pay for a police officer's salary. And that was something I pointed out is why aren't city staffers paying their fair share toward healthcare benefits if they're going up 2 to 3% a year? Because everyone in this room knows that works in private industry, they're paying a lot more than that in increases every year out of their own pocket. The other thing I'd like to point out is we have this levy, which has nothing to do with police and fire, by the way.
Monica, if you could
I'm
conclude
sorry,
your comments,
but,
please.
okay, I'll get there.
Wrap it up.
We have the state levy, we have Proposition 1, which taxpayers were sold it would be 1%.
Monica, if you could conclude your
Nobody was
comments,
told it would go up to 6% a year, which we're expecting that increase soon.
Monica, I don't hear you concluding the comments. Please
Okay,
conclude it.
I
Do
am.
you have written
If
comments
you'll
you want to
stop
submit?
arguing with me and actually let me speak, I could wrap it up.
If you have written comments you'd like to submit, you could do it. Otherwise,
Okay.
otherwise you're done.
And now we're talking about
Monica, you're
utility
done.
taxes. So
Okay.
if you want the school board,
Monica, order, please. You're finished. Thank you.
I just want the council to consider
If
that
you
if
could
they
submit your
want
written comments, that
the
would be fine.
second school bond that needs to pass to
Monica,
go
if you could
through,
please
they
respect
really
the
need
time
to
of the other
consider.
people in the
You need
audience
to
who would
respect
like to
people in
speak.
this room, Matt. You're very
You
disrespectful.
have to respect the decorum of this chamber
Okay,
that
well,
we run by
I
rules
think
and
Anna had more
procedures.
time than me. I don't think she was on a timer, but that's okay.
She was on a timer.
She wouldn't
All right.
wouldn't have a problem with it. Anyway, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this item prior to a vote? All right. Council, is there any further discussion before we vote? All those in favor?
Hold
Oh,
on,
I'm
I
sorry.
do have one. Did you really think you were going to get by with that?
Go ahead, Councilman.
Question for, I believe this would be for you, Bob. How many city staff do we have total? Give or take, 1 or 2?
I'll say 105.
Yeah.
105. And how many of those are union?
Roughly 85, I think. 80,
Okay.
85.
Because police, fire, and then a good number of the regular staff.
Teamsters alone has about 40 to 45 of
Okay.
the
So these about 20, 25 or so that are.
management professional.
Okay.
That's
Can you?
probably a little high, but yeah, it's
Okay. Can you tell me what is the current contribution of those 20 to their health
Zero.
benefits? Zero. So there's 20 employees or so that are contributing zero.
right. It's part of the salary and benefits package. Yes.
Okay.
I'm answering his question, Rob.
So, next step, thank you, Rob, for the segue. Of the 85 that are union, police, fire, city, do any of those contribute to their health care?
No.
Okay. So no city staff contribute to their health care?
That's correct. If I could just clarify one, that there is the prescriptions. There's a copay on that.
Okay.
So that would, it's a
But
very
there's a
small-
$0 monthly contribution to
towards the
their
health insurance
premiums?
premium, that's correct.
Okay.
But again, I want to clarify, it's part of they're part of their negotiated package for the union. So
Right.
it includes salary and benefits.
And I understand that. So, and those negotiations are coming up for renewal in the next few months, is that correct? Or are they ongoing right now?
The police has 1 year left, which is through 2018, and then fire and Teamsters, we're in progress right now. They both expire at the end of 2017, both those contracts.
So like in a month?
Yes.
Okay. Last question I think I have on this topic. Comparing with Issaquah, Sammamish, Maple Valley, Covington, North Bend, how do our employee packages, because it really doesn't matter what comparing city employees to a Microsoft or it's completely irrelevant because that's not the same marketplace. So in the marketplace of public employees, how does this compare with some of those cities that I named, or do you know?
Don't know, it would require more research.
So I guess I lied, I have one more question. So are you the chief negotiator for the city in union negotiations?
Not at this time.
Who is?
Deborah Vigil.
Is Deborah here?
No.
So as part of those negotiations, would it be reasonable for her to understand what surrounding communities, what the public worker marketplace is yielding and not yielding for benefits?
Generally, yes, particularly with police and fire, because they're under binding arbitration rules of the state, and so it requires us to do what's called comparables. So we look at agencies that are of similar size, particularly it goes based on assessed valuation of the community and population of the community. And the comparables can be 50% less than or 50% greater than those two indicators or benchmarks. Police and fire only. Teamsters is separate. They are not under binding arbitration. And that's the type of contract that would be, it's a bit different and less complex than police and fire, I'll put it that way. But yes, in general, we do look at those issues of surrounding communities and agencies.
Yeah, bottom line, if you want to attract and retain quality employees, you need to be paying attention to those competitive issues, or otherwise you'll lose them to other cities. Councilmember Pruitt?
So while we're not required to use the comparables in every setting of the M&P schedule along with the Teamsters contract, we do look at comparables and we do look at total benefits, including salary and benefits, correct?
Yes, we look at, as I mentioned earlier twice, we look at a total compensation package. So we're very careful to ensure that, and this is no secret, when we negotiate, it's all public information, but when I wasn't a lead negotiator until this past, the 2 sessions, because of other responsibilities and other issues, I removed myself. We've got ample and very skilled negotiators on our team, but we're very careful to look at that total compensation package, because if you're, as we try to explain to the union groups, we have so much money, and we tell them if you want a little bit more on wages, it's going to have to come off benefits and or vice versa. That's part of our strategy. We don't obviously tell them that number, but we have to obviously bracket those issues. It's pretty common to negotiations.
One more question related to that, Mayor. When you guys come to us with the Teamsters contract to approve, which I believe is the process, right?
Correct.
We'll have to approve that. Will you be coming as standard procedure to provide us information on similar contracts for other cities?
Yeah, we typically do.
You won't be briefed on any of those questions in executive session typically, where you can get into the details of the contract.
Okay, so before I have to vote, I will know how ours stack up against other cities.
Typically, yes. But again, with police and fire, you'll know that from the comparables. We have to list those. We don't always necessarily use those. Sometimes we can negotiate a contract without that benefit. But typically, with police and fire, they have their set of comparables. We have ours. And the same with Teamsters.
Okay.
Mayor.
Councilmember Pruitt?
I wanted to get back to Ms. Attilo's question about, wanted to get back to a question about waiting for the review of our financial controls versus voting on this tonight. And one of my questions was, I believe we have to move on this tonight. If we bank the funds, I believe those aren't available until the next cycle, correct? You can't do a
That's correct.
midterm, 3 months from now, go ahead and unbank those, or whatever the term is, correct?
That's correct. And Mayor, if I could just clarify a comment made earlier, this is for council, obviously, prior to the vote. The city attorney looked up the actual statute. The requirement is that the council has to adopt this ordinance on or before November 30th. So that'd be this Thursday. It's not, I also.
We have to actually certify
to the county.
the property tax levy for the coming year to the county assessor by the 30th of November. And that date's actually in the statute.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, then I'll ask all those in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
All right, that's two nays, Sunwell and Holloway, and all the rest are ayes. All right, thank you, council. With that, move on to Agenda Bill 17159, ordinance certifying an increase in the general taxes for the city of Snoqualmie for the fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2018, on all property, both real and personal, in said city, which is subject to taxation. The general taxes are for the purpose of paying sufficient revenue to carry on the departments of said city for the ensuing year. This was introduced on the 13th, so if you could just please read the motion, it's ready for action tonight. Councilmember Jeans.
Move to approve ordinance
1197.
1197, certifying an increase in the general taxes for the city of Snoqualmie for the fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2018, on all property, real and personal, in said city of which the subject is subject to taxation. The general taxes are for the purpose of paying sufficient revenues to carry on the departments of said city for the ensuing year. Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 1197 as stated by Councilmember Jeans. Is there any discussion, council?
Add it.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, is there anyone in the audience that would like to, or any citizen that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Motion is carried with one opposed, Councilmember Holloway. All right, with that, we move on to Agenda Bill 17160, ordinance amending ordinance 1186, adopting the 2017 and 2018 budget. Again, this was introduced on the 13th and is ready for action. Will not be ready for action until the first meeting in December on the 11th.